Hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to Proc-N-Roll, your guide to practical procurement, where we make procurement rock and roll. As always, I've got Natasha, our pro CPO from IBM to McKesson, Salesforce, Nike, and now the founder and CEO of Candid Procurement, enabling transformation results for some of the world's top procurement teams. We've got Conrad, our innovator from Intel, CPO at Adobe, and now founder and CEO of one of the hottest procurement startups, Graphite. Myself, Zach. I'm your go-to consultant on all things procurement. And we've also got Anthony in the wings as well. So shout out to Anthony. How's everybody doing today?
Yay to our producer.
Yeah, our producer makes all the magic happen.
This is in the US, like we'll post this a little bit later, but it's Labor Day week, right? So our typical 5-day week is crammed into 4 days. I was joking earlier that it just gives us another day to catch up on our work before we jump into our work. So I'm sure Natasha knows that feeling, working on a startup of her own.
Exactly the same. Yes, the day started early.
Yeah. Well, today's topic is RFPs, right? What can we say about RFPs? You know, is RFP are RFPs the future? Is there a place for RFPs in the future, or are we now as procurement having to find new ways to do sourcing? And the reason I say that is because I think procurement as a whole, I think the value procurement delivers, that definition of value is being expanded. So whereas before it used to be costs and getting the best price, nowadays it's really about speed and making sure you get innovative products and services in, and you help the business grow, and you help teams across the business achieve more, as opposed to just trying to do the best cost that you can. So I think it's a super interesting subject, because everyone I speak to in my network, nobody seems to have like a great opinion of RFPs. I think there's a acknowledgement from most people that they're just required. Like there's an element of you need to do an RFP. But I'm excited to hear your views. What do you think? RFPs, yay or nay?
As always, the answer, it depends. Okay, so why did we have RFPs? We had RFPs to create competitive environment. Maybe 25 years ago, it was the only way to create competitive environment. There are many other ways to create competitive environment today. And I think as procurement professionals, we have to strive to find alternative ways to not to create RFPs. So I wrote an article 9 months ago at the end of 2024, saying, come on, procurement, we can do better. And I was inspiring everyone to walk away from the RFPs. So just like Conrad, I am not in support of RFPs, but I recognize that they serve the purpose. The problem is that people who create RFPs, procurement professionals, they never have to reply to them. And they do not understand the pain and expense and just enormous workload on suppliers to understand what procurement meant by putting the RFP together, then by providing responses, then by collecting any feedback back. So I hope we'll find a way to only have RFPs when it's absolutely must, and replace them with better, faster, more humane ways to create competitive environment.
Well, let's try to pause. Go on, Conrad. Sorry.
No, I really agree with Natasha. And when I give my down thumb here on RFPs, it's because I would say RFPs generally they're sort of a traditional way to do things now, and they've been incorporated into our policies in such a way that, I think everybody out there, either they have a policy or they want to have a policy that says, hey, this is where you have to get procurement involved. And the understanding of that procurement involvement and that procurement managed competitive bid process is implementing this RFP instead of, like Natasha said, actually just implementing some other method for competitive bidding or managing the process and doing what's right. some of these policies even say that you can't, you have to go through these approval processes to do some single source decision and, just, negotiate and renew the contract. So it's been built into our policy, and then it's built into our muscle memory that this is what an RFP looks like. And it's disgusting, right? Because most of the time, because people on the team are lazy, they're cutting and pasting old RFPs together. They're even reaching out to people outside the company and bringing the RFP. So it's like this idea that the more questions that are in the RFP, the more complicated the RFP is, the more sophisticated I am in my approach to going through this process. And I think that's nonsense, right? But I think if you go talk to people, that's what I have to do. That's how it has, I'm cutting and pasting data privacy questions in from the legal team. I'm cutting and pasting cybersecurity questions in from the IT team. I'm cutting, and you just go down this list, which, by the way, is a growing list of due diligence or prerequisites to be qualified. It's crazy. The RFPs are ridiculous. As Natasha said, it takes way too long. When I started replying to RFPs after I left procurement, got on the supplier side, just makes you want to puke. And then, by the way, you go read the RFPs and they're terrible. There's 25 questions bundled up into one cell of a spreadsheet where you're kind of like, well, it's not a yes or no. This is like, I'm going to have to write an essay on this. And it's really hard to what's the crux of what you're trying to ask? Questions are repeated during the RFP because nobody took the time to really make sure that they were, the thing that privacy asking, the same thing that security's asking and procurement's asking separately. It's just sloppy. I see that sloppiness all the time, and it's embarrassing. So I made a personal commitment to myself. If I ever go back into practitioner as a CPO, nobody sends an RFP without actually completing an RFP first. So they can kind of see what happens on the other side of the table, and they can see that it's worth investing the effort to rethink the document. I got a lot of other opinions, but I'm gonna stop there and kind of give you guys a chance to pipe in.
How do you really feel, Conrad? Because your passion is just not coming through clearly.
Bring in the gasoline, light a match. Let's blow this, get rid of this tradition. Let's start it again, right? There's way better ways to do it.
So, Zach, it's interesting, both you and Conrad speaking about policies, but procurement is the one who created that policy that RFP must be issued for something for above certain threshold, or
it's driven by the government, right? A government procurement has got its own. There are regulations around using RFPs.
Is it?
Well, yeah, in the UK there is. I imagine in the US as well.
Yeah, in the US
as well.
No, it is, Natasha. In the state of California, if something's over, I don't know what California laws are, I'm just going to make something up, $200,000, then you have to go through a competitive bidding process, which, again, is translated into this is what an RFP looks like. I don't think the RFP has to be what we accepted it to be. If the business, imagine, and this happened to me when I was at Omniture, the head of facilities came to me and said, look, we just bought this land to build a new building. I have 2 weeks to make sure that before we sign off on the land deal, the due diligence work on the land, we have to get an engineer in there, and the engineer has to test the soil and make sure blah, 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 all this stuff, right? So you have 2 weeks. I need an answer within 2 weeks. So this RFP needs to take because we got to pick the engineer, right? So you got to go help me figure out who the engineer is. We got to make the decision, and they got to get their work done, and everything. All that's got to happen in 2 weeks. And when you put those kind of constraints on it, then it's it was starting to throw out pieces of the process just right from the beginning, because there's no way I can implement a 400 or 500 page process, give them 10 days to respond, take 10 days to do the scoring, but it could still be an RFP. It just doesn't feel like that other process.
Okay, I need to educate myself on whether it's really government requirement that applies to corporations, because corporations often make an exception when they decide not to issue an RFP, and I do not believe that they require any government.
No.
There's a guideline. There's a guideline, but I think at the end of the day, if their compliance is to following the policy that the company creates. So if you feel that the policy you have no longer reflects the current state of the business, And if in order to move faster, be more efficient, you have to change the policy, just change the freaking policy and start following new process, because compliance is not following someone's policy, it's to following your policy, whatever you create.
Yeah, no, just to clarify, I'm not saying that every business in California has to follow the laws of government procurement in California. So government procurement organizations have to follow the codified law, like that's their policy, right?
Yeah.
And then organizations in support of the government are doing those things as well. I love your point, Natasha, which is quit acting like a victim. It's your policy. Like, stand up as a leader and say, hey, this is or isn't working for us. And this is, I mean, by the way, because our policy says we need, procurement needs to lead a competitive process, doesn't mean we have to default to an RFP. I mean, we're probably going to say this 30 times during this podcast, but it doesn't mean you have to do an RFP.
Yeah, I agree. And that's the point, right? Like, when should you do an RFP versus not? Because maybe a lot of procurement teams are out there running RFPs where they didn't need to. For me, one big distinction is like how well defined the requirements are, how commoditized the product is. Because if, in that case, you can just do like an RFQ, which I differentiate from an RFP, because an RFQ is just quotes, everything's known, your specs. If you don't know your specs, then I think is where you go out and you try to get suppliers to propose, an approach or a solution. But then the mistakes procurement teams make is exactly what you're alluding to, Conrad, is they'll just lift and shift questions from an old RFP document and recycle them. And then they'll add a few more questions from this even older document. And then before you know it, you have this giant document full of questions. And they send it out to the supplier. And they don't even give the supplier an opportunity to actually shape a creative approach. Like, they don't define the problem statement that well. They don't give suppliers an opportunity to come in and say, like, here's what we would do before you go out and scope this thing in more detail. Here are some, ideas around how we can solve your problem specifically. And I think to your point as well, Conrad, I think as procurement's role as the risk manager in operations has grown, what that's doing is it's putting pressure on procurement. And I think a lot of procurement people are feeling quite risk averse because they don't want to get in trouble for having onboarded the wrong supplier or not screened the supplier. And so it's a massive box ticking exercise, exactly like you said, Conrad, to satisfy privacy and legal and data protection and everything, right? But maybe that's what needs to happen, is you should have just that first checklist, which is just focused on the core questions, that qualifying questions. Like, you make sure this doesn't, real hygiene, right? Not getting all the info, but just the absolute minimum to qualify as a supplier. And then from there, you run your RFP process and you make changes to that process.
I got a shout out to a friend of mine, Zoe. She lives there in New York, and she's traveled all over the country teaching game theory negotiation. And she's attended a couple of my events and kind of shared her high-level training here. One of the things she says in her training that is super, super powerful is you get to make the rules of the game. We've just let that sink in. That's where you get your power as the buyer. You get to make the rules of the game. So you get to decide, Zach, like you're saying, is this RFP going to look like a really simple RFQ? Is this RFP going to be presented in the context of an auction? Is this RFP, that is just going to be presented in the case of a proof of concept? Like, you have all of these things you can do in this process, but you are like the game master. And the most important thing you can do is set up the game board to the benefit of the outcome you're trying to achieve. And that is, to me, very empowering, because it says, look, I'm not just following some rote procurement process. I need to be really mindful of the outcome I'm trying to achieve. And then I need to bring the rules to this game that are going to best support the business I'm supporting and the outcomes I'm trying to accomplish.
Why is that creativity not there then? Why do procurement cycle through RFP documents as a default sort of action?
I think they're missing. Part of it is they don't feel empowered to do the right thing. Part of it is they're not fully trained on other mechanisms. I think from a leadership perspective, we've shown a pattern. Like, we're now like 20, 30 years into this is what the bidding process looks like. So we just keep regurgitating these nonsense RFPs, and they don't lead to the outcomes we're talking about. I mean, ultimately what you're doing if you're making a decision on an RFP is you are picking the best RFP responder. Like, that's really scary when you think about it, right? Because we've interviewed people for all of our jobs, and the person that answers an interview questions and shows up in an interview is not always the best person when they sit in the seat and do the job. And that's really there's big limitations in this traditional way to go through the process that we need to be thoughtful about.
Completely agree. And to that point, you might sideline some smaller companies who maybe can't support a big RFP process, but can do a great job, right? But you have Mr. Corporate on the side who's got tons of resources and has done these things 100 times before and has template answers and stuff. Yeah, it's really important to think about that stuff. Natasha, what do you think?
A conversation with a former colleague comes to mind. They launched an RFP, and they proudly shared that they invited 19 providers to participate in the first round. And why do they carry it as a badge of honor? And we did it before too in early years. Like, we started with 19 suppliers. Now I understand what it means. When you're starting with 19 suppliers, it means that you have no idea what you want. You have not done your homework in really defining what you need as an organization. So you're starting with 19 suppliers, and I'm sure that you will match it with 19 stakeholders that will be reviewing those responses. And they're probably not a single one person who knows that very, very deeply to say that how it should be, then how responses should be evaluated. So let's break down this nonsense. One part is that there are probably not even 19 providers in any particular area that can deliver the same level of service to a particular to the organization of a particular size, right? Like, and even if there is, and they are all equal, then why to invite 19? If you as a procurement professional would meet with a 3 of these 19 before in a detailed conversation, like, share with me about your model, give me a demo, tell me how it will fit my environment, educate me on the risks if I bring your solution, ask them about their competitors, right? It's like, who do you consider your competitors? How is your solution better than theirs? What are the areas where their solution is better than yours? If you would do that homework, you as a procurement professional can come to the set of stakeholders and say that, you know what, we don't really need 19. If we invite these 5 to very detailed conversation, then we'll have all we need. Another thing about RFP is that whenever we get these written responses, they usually do not answer all the questions we have. And suppliers provide their responses also making a lot of assumptions because they didn't have a chance to ask a lot of questions before they can submit their responses. So someone spent a lot of time writing the RFP, then someone, like 19 suppliers, took time to interpret what is written in RFP and made 19 different interpretations and assumptions. They write the responses based on the interpretations and assumptions that they've made. And then there's another group of internal stakeholders trying to understand what suppliers meant. While in reality, all of that could have sorted out through conversation before then collecting the pricing and have like 10, 15, 20 critical questions versus 780 as those RFPs usually have. And then have fairly short, after receiving pricing, evaluation of who is better positioned to deliver services. I think that we overcomplicated it in the past, and now we're just sticking with the legacy processes and not investing time into educating our procurement organizations on what else is out there.
Maybe it's the whole 7-step thing that I think, 7 steps, 7 or 6 steps, or everyone in procurement knows this thing is documented by SIPs. And I think it's a well-known question. I think that is the problem. because I think it frames in everyone's head the RFP process is a linear process whereby you go, start out by sending an RFI, then you get some prices in, then you do evaluation, and then you award the contract. But there's more back and forth, I think, that we need to do nowadays with suppliers. I think in the past, where you have really clear requirements and, the world wasn't as complicated and technology solutions didn't come with 10 zillion questions they need to answer. That process probably worked fine. But now I think almost like people need to feel they have the creative freedom to like break that process and say, all right, after step one, I'm only going to ask 10 questions, right? And then we'll have a workshop, right? Then I'll send out step two, which is the same RFP, right? It's just appending a bunch of questions and moving it in that way, as opposed to like having one RFP document. Because I think everyone's head's like, I just want to get this RFP done, one big document, put everything in there, throw it out to the supplier, and I'll get everything back. I won't read it, but at least I'll have ticked the box and I'll show everyone I did my job. And I think that's where people need to feel like, well, no, you don't have to do that. It's like you said, Natasha. First of all, do your research, understand how many suppliers are realistic, right, for you to your approach. Then you got to go and do the high level, essential qualifications, the hygiene factors, right, for the suppliers, like basic things like, where are their offices, where do they host data, how many employees. They're just very simple stuff, so you can tell that this is the right kind of supplier that you can work with, and then you can start that process, and you have creativity in that process. So it's not just a set of 600 questions, but maybe you give your problem statement to the suppliers and you say, do you know what? To start with, I'm not going to ask you questions about your solution. You tell me what your solution is, right? And here are the things that I'm interested in. Here's what I'm going to be scoring. My point is, just like this freedom from the 7 steps or the 6 steps or whatever RFP process that's modeled today.
For sure. What do you think about reverse auctions, Zach?
I think, again, you need commoditized products to be able to do it, because if the suppliers are competing in any auction, there needs to be really homogeneous requirements. Because if one supplier has a slightly different technology that does things in a slightly different way, it's very hard, right? Unless you actually don't care at all. But more often than not, when it comes to buying things like tech and highly complicated products and services, it's very hard to commoditize them, right? Because they all do very different things.
We had great success with very unusual, or not unusual, maybe like not the first category that comes to mind when you think about reverse auction. We once auctioned legal firm fees, and it was great because we had amazing partnership with legal at that particular company, and we generated, I think, about 15% reduction on legal fees, which is unheard of because just law firms don't negotiate.
How did you manage to do that, Natasha? Because you had to break down, I guess, the specific services that the legal team provide, the exact service.
We broke down like this is intellectual property hourly rate for the partners, for the paralegals. This is so just separate that this is if they defend us in court, this is different geographies. You just break it down different blocks, and then you create kind of like ceilings and floor that if especially in the countries with higher currency fluctuation and greater volatility, that if a dollar fluctuates within 3%, then the party that experiences swings enjoys the benefits or carries the risks. And if it goes above certain threshold, then you'll renegotiate or you just increase the rate by something. So what I'm saying is that legal services is not something that typically comes to mind as a good candidate for reverse action, but can be done.
Yeah,
it's effective, transparent.
Zach, I think you used the word commodity, or Natasha did at the beginning of your question on auctions, and you either reverse auction commodity like stuff or you commoditize what you're buying, right? Because at that point you're doing you've sort of blended out all of the variations and said we've got this to a place where we can do kind of apples to apples comparison based on maybe the presented price. That means you have to put a healthy amount of pre-work and due diligence into the front of that process. Does legal services from this law firm the same as legal services from that law firm based on their experience? And so you have to be comparing things that you care about. But it's super valuable thing to do. I mean, I was a couple of CPOs in the past at Google. I was talking to them about it, and they said we because of the nature of they auction keywords, right? And part of their search process is kind of part of their DNA. So they were like, we auction everything. We just figure out how to commoditize it down and auction it off. And believe me, I think that's a terrible idea. It's the same thing as putting an RFP out for everything, put an auction out for everything. Like, once again, where it's like, we're going to do everything the same way, takes you out of that innovative space that you're talking about, where you're the game master and you're doing what is going to work best for the outcome you're trying to achieve.
I think it's doable for things like intellectual property, legal advice, and because some of these services are well established. I think there are areas in the legal domain where you can't define, like litigation, right? You'd want to find the law firm with the most experience in that specific issue, which is going to be very unique to your case, right? So I think there is differentiation there, but just going a step further, take Conrad, take like Graphite, right? Like if I wanted to buy an onboarding solution, right, for rapid onboarding, like usually what customers will start off with is say it's procurement team, and they say, look, our pain point here is just supplier onboarding, supplier communication, supplier management, and it's quite generic at that stage, right? And it's very hard to go from a general statement like that to like, okay, here's the commoditized slip sheet of like all the key services that I'm going to be looking for in a solution. Because again, it's a bit of it's an exercise in creativity, right? Not just for the procurement team, but also the startups that have gone out and actually built solutions. Like, they've got a vision of how it should work. And I think that's where it's a bit hard. So I don't know if you've got any advice, for example. Like, let's say I'm a procurement CPO, I want to buy an onboarding tool. How would you do it?
Well, I think what's critical in all of these decisions is narrow down what matters most to your decision. And I think we've gone the other direction here, where you have 3 or 4 or 5 or 600 questions in your RFP. I presented this idea to a CPO, and it was like an epiphany to him. I was like, the privacy questions that you're asking, the security questions that you're asking are, and by the way, you're coming in and having them do weighted scoring on the suppliers. Is that really weighted scoring, or is that like a qualification question? Yes or no? Like, am I asking you guys to give me your opinion on which one you really like better? Or I'm asking you guys to tell me, do I have to disqualify any of these, as part of my shortlisting process? That takes you down a completely different path, right? Like, I'm going to say, hey, at this point now, I want you to limit your questions to those things that are going to disqualify a supplier. Like, maybe you need to have a SOC 2 or an ISO. If you don't get a play. Like, that's really the only question I have for you on the security or privacy side or whatever it might be, right? That's going to change the game. But I think when you go back and look at something like Graphite, I mean, if you sent me an RFP and say, hey, I want your best and final pricing, like, I can't even do that in an RFP, because it's not clear which of my modules you're going to use. I'm not sure you're really counting your quantities, and like, it just doesn't even work because it's such a convoluted set of questions and assumptions that it just doesn't work well. But so now let's say you narrowed down the selection for a supplier onboarding platform to 3. I could ask all 3 of you to give me your pricing in an auction environment, right? And I could reserve for myself the fact that I'm not going to force myself to pick the lowest price, because I know, option A has these kind of extra bells and whistles and value versus option B or option C. Again, it's just a tool to use to get really crisp and clear on one of the variables that plays into the decision. Imagine doing an auction where you're trying to compare 12 variables at the same time, and just forget about it. It's a tool. Like, we got to be smart how we use the tools. I would say Natasha, the people that should be most proud about their selection process are the ones that do the research. They send it to the fewest suppliers, and they have the most concise process to get through kind of their RFP or their shortlisting or whatever it is. But then they come up with some innovative way to have the supplier prove the claims that they're making. Like the blend in, we haven't even talked about like POCs or pilots, right? But how often are decisions made and contracts signed based on an RFP and a trivial demo that can, in today's world of technology, you can fake out a demo like super easy, right? Like by the time you're into like really sophisticated implementation stuff, that's going to go way beyond the stuff you can put in a demo. But I can make a demo look like really perfect stuff.
Zach, in your work, did you see good examples of how procurement people use benchmark? Or how do you use benchmark?
Benchmarking in terms of pricing or in terms of like the solution buying and the
we're looking for various ways can we eliminate RFPs because they're painful, and benchmark it doesn't answer all the questions, but it gives you kind of good indication where the market stands or.
Yeah, I agree, Natasha. I think it just depends. You need to know what you're buying again, right? Like I think one thing that I'm landing on is that you only really use an RFP where you don't know what you're buying. If you know what you're buying and you've bought it before and your stakeholder already has suppliers in mind, it's a well-known area, right? And it's not super complicated like a big piece of technology or anything, then do an RFQ. Don't do an RFP. You don't need to go down this.
I actually would like to challenge you on what you just said. If you bought it before and you know what you're buying, then if following this logic, then you're prone to buy the same from the same.
Well, you could do benchmarking.
But the world has changed. Maybe today, like we know, I've seen a lot of organizations, they said that we want to walk away from big providers. We would rather go with two smaller than one big. Because a lot of organizations, like the big companies became so big that even the companies with like 5, 7, 8 billion in revenue feel themselves as a small fish in someone's pond. And so that's just one particular area that
I completely concur.
That struck me differently that. Yeah, like it's not that if you bought the same and then just buy it from the same.
No, but the point is you know what you're buying. So in other words, you don't need to subject suppliers to a long process to explain the market and how it works and what their product does. Like I think what you can do is you can just because you've done it before and you understand it, you can just break down the specification and you can commoditize it, right? But if you can't do that, I think that's where you're like, okay, we need a longer process to understand what is in the market, who are the players, what exactly is their take, how are they different? Because a lot of times that's true. Like even the stakeholder would say, I have this problem, I want to bring on the technology to solve it, but I have no idea which suppliers are there, what solutions are out there. Like that's a completely blank slate.
So Zach, let me just say that you have other tools, right? You can do demos with the top players. I think Natasha mentioned that. You can do an RFI. And I don't know how you would really say an RFI is different than an RFP, except one has a pricing section and the other one doesn't. But again, if you're going into that step, you went back to the 6-step process and said, this is the problem. If you're going into that necessary step with clarity about what do I need to achieve first, and then you design that step to achieve the shortlisting or the learning or whatever it is that fits in there, then you're going to do it differently than just throw some generic document at it. Like, do I include all the privacy and security stuff in an RFI? Maybe, probably not necessary. Is a demo going to be more instructive for me and my stakeholders than a really lengthy set of spreadsheet questions? Probably, because it's more interactive. Like I think that you got to think through those parts of is RFP the best mechanism for me to learn and kind of understand better what I want to buy? I don't know. I kind of doubt it.
I think it's in the name for me because it's request for proposal. So the proposal is what the supplier is going to be proposing. And ideally it just, it fits perfectly, like solves your problem, right? I think it's leaned on as a crutch too much to do an RFP. Probably we do more RFPs than we need to, probably, in procurement.
I think that if category leads would spend time learning their category, and they would know their space very well, and they would have the right level of benchmark, and they would know what's happening in the industry, then a request for proposal will be coming not from the suppliers to the buyers, but from the buyers to suppliers. Boom. I just created the new way of doing RFPs. Because it's basically, it's me coming to Graphite and saying, like, I love your solution. I like what it does. Show it to me. And like, it's me, the buyer, proposing to Graphite that I think it will fit my solution. Like, convince me otherwise. And then, yes, you can, it's a Graphite job to offer me a pricing, but then, and I can negotiate in the same manner and just land on something.
But don't you think when you look at the solution, Natasha, it's going to look maybe they look completely different. Say you got your two suppliers in, because there are things that you don't even think about, like even just the user interface, like what that looks like. One supplier can put you off entirely just when they show you their, what I'm trying to get at is, is how, can you, okay, here's my question. Can you ever commoditize a technology product / service like Graphite? It's got, sufficient complexity in it, and where suppliers all do slightly different things and do it in slightly different ways. And have
it all
different
depends
add-ons.
what you're trying to solve, right? So yes, they do different things, but if it solves your problem and your need, then yes. Then commodity is not dictated then by what supplier is selling, but by what I'm buying.
Yeah, exactly. Conrad, your final word on this?
Well, we had Alan Rice on a webinar for us over here at Graphite, and he talked about a project they did with a company that was super anxious to implement AI. They decided to evaluate 14, these numbers are important, 14 different solutions. They implemented 10 different proof of concepts of those 14. So they washed 4 out just with some basic research. They did 10 proof of concepts. And then they went live in production and started using 5 tools in under 9 months from an AI perspective. So if you think about the implications of, using a novel and new approach to get to, in their case, it was like speed, right? Because his basic premise is AI is going to turn over in the amount of time it takes you to go through a traditional RFP process. AI is not, the answers you're getting from the supplier are different, right? You've got to be able to move fast. You've got to be able to really start using this stuff. So speed was their priority. And they didn't use any RFPs. They went into this POC, the pilot, the project, whatever you want to call it, in order to really learn. And I would say that most of the time, and back to where I started at the beginning, when you're hiring somebody, the interview isn't generally the best way to make the decision. Like, if you could put somebody side by side with someone on your team and have them work with them for a week and then decide whether you're going to hire them, oh my gosh, like that kind of thinking from a supplier perspective, how can we get that kind of a breakthrough? It's got to go outside of paper processes, right? You've got to put a lot more credibility into real stuff instead of the vapor that gets wrapped up into paper.
I think that's a great achievement, great outcome, by the way. 9 months, 5 live use cases with 5 different providers. So
Yeah.
great
Perfect.
success. Yeah. Well, I don't know. Are we going to have another chat on RFPs? Do you guys think?
Well, we'll have to catch up. There's a lot to talk about, and I think as I mentioned Zoe, I'd love to get Zoe on here to do a walkthrough, just kind of game
That's a
theory and
great idea.
auction. She tends to talk a lot about auctions, but it isn't the only way to control the game board. But yeah, there's a ton here. I think the biggest message that I want to share and that I get out of you guys have really reinforced it in my mind is, like, we can take more control here. The policy, it's our policy. Like the tradition, the process, it doesn't have to be 500 questions. Don't cut and paste. Don't copy that long stuff. Focus on what matters most and the outcome you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, take back control. Exactly.
As always, to be continued.
To be continued. But yeah, thank you both. And thanks to all our listeners, as always. And see you in the next episode.
Take care. Thanks, Zach, Natasha. Bye.
Rock and roll.